Good morning, my lovely things. Welcome back to the cavern, or welcome if you're new here. I hope everyone enjoyed their weekends and your week is off to a great start thus far. I was reminded of three billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri from a Simpsons episode. As funny as that might be. Chief Wiggum in the episode is standing near three billboards that are basically saying how horrible of a police officer he is, which triggered the memory, of course. I decided to refresh my memory of the movie and the crime case behind it. The movie is available to stream on Fubo if you have a subscription, but if you're like me who doesn't have one, you can rent it pretty much anywhere, although for such an older movie, I'm surprised by the rental fees. You would think they'd be like $1.99. Oh no, they're $3.99, which doesn't make sense to me, but they want to make their money, I guess. I won't be discussing the movie though. I'm focusing solely on the true crime case, so you don't have to worry about spoilers. There also is some big differences between the movie and the criminal case that inspired it. So the movie follows the events following the rape and murder of a teenage girl in Missouri, of course, obvious. However, the true crime case revolves the murder of 34-year-old Kathy Page in Vidor, Texas. Kathy recently split from her husband Steve, and their daughters were living with Kathy in their home. The night of her death, Kathy was going out for some drinks and required a babysitter. She called her estranged husband to look after them while she went out with her girlfriend. However, she wasn't going to meet her friend. She was actually going out on a date and meeting the man at his hotel in Beaumont, a few miles away. Steve agreed and went to the house where Kathy was getting ready. She left around 11 in her car and headed straight to the hotel. Unfortunately, the next morning at 5, Kathy's black Mercury Tracer was found in a ditch 100 yards from her home. Kathy was dead in the driver's seat, and the crash appeared to be an accident. Upon further investigation, the police found there was something wrong with the crime scene. The car was at an angle nose first in the trench, yet Kathy was sitting upright against the seat with her head pressed against the headrest, despite not wearing her seatbelt. So, in an accident, there of course is an impact. And usually you end up hunched over the steering wheel if you died. I mean, most of us would actually sit back up, but especially if the airbag was deployed, I believe. But none of that was the case, so it's kind of weird. The contents of her purse were still intact as well. They weren't spilled out all over the floor. The open can of soda hadn't spilled, and the exterior of the car wasn't damaged. Grass was found on Kathy's clothing, despite her body being found fully inside the car. So all of these kind of raised some red flags for the police force. Detective Ray Mosley approached Steve Page with the news about his wife being found dead, and he found Steve's reaction quite odd. Steve immediately said Kathy wasn't home and looked down the street towards where the car was. He seemed upset, started crying, and at times throwing himself on the couch crying, but then jumped right back up and started talking to the officer again without any tears in his eyes. Odd. Kathy's autopsy showed she was strangled and received a broken nose in the scuffle. There were also signs that she was sexually assaulted by someone who had a vasectomy, since there was a lack of sperm in the semen found at the crime scene. There was blood found on the back of her neck, which transferred blood onto her clothes. It was clear that she was murdered elsewhere and placed in the car to make it appear as though she died in an accident. Kathy's date, Tom, volunteered to help with the investigation and passed a polygraph test. He was never considered a suspect. He explained that she left the hotel at around 2:30 in the morning and drove straight home. When she left, Kathy was wearing white jeans, a gray top, a watch, her wedding ring, and earrings. She also had a full face of makeup on. However, when Kathy was found, she was barefaced without any jewelry on, and her socks were missing. Weird. I don't know why you would take their socks. That's so weird. Kathy's sister Sherry stated that Kathy's bare face was part of Kathy's nightly routine of removing her makeup and jewelry before taking a shower and going to bed. Steve wasn't questioned right away, nor were his daughters. It wasn't until 2 days later that Steve was asked to go to the police station to answer a few questions. During the interview, he told the police that he and Kathy had sex the night before she went out. Steve had a vasectomy a few months earlier, which would explain why there would be semen found inside of her during the autopsy. Kathy and Steve met when she was 21 in Viter. Steve was an insurance salesman and the two were married in November 1981. Their eldest daughter was soon born after. Their second daughter was born 4 years later. However, by 1991, their marriage was over and Kathy asked Steve for a friendly divorce. Steve moved out a few days before Kathy was murdered and was living in a condo nearby so he could be around his children. Sounds like a decent guy. He actually mentioned to investigators that they were working things out, but Sherry told them otherwise. Kathy was already moving on. The night Kathy told Steve she was meeting her with her friend Charlotte for drinks, Steve actually called Charlotte and knew his wife wasn't out with her friend because underneath Charlotte's phone number, he found the number to the hotel in Beaumont, which he actually called. Steve then became the prime suspect in Kathy's murder. He claimed that he had received phone calls from an unknown person who was threatening him. He claimed he tried to help in the investigation, but he was told he wasn't needed. These all sound like excuses to me, but despite the announcement that a suspect had been named, police never arrested Steve, and their lack of action angered Kathy's family. Understandably, I'd be pretty pissed off. James Fulton, her father, was convinced the police were covering for Steve since he grew up around members of the police force, and his parents were friends with Detective Mosley's mother and father. James began painting signs to attract attention from people driving through Viter, hoping to push the police department into investigating his daughter's case further. Some of the signs are behind me, for those who are curious. One of the statements included Steve Page brutally murdered his wife in 1991. Viter PD does not want to solve this case. I believe they took a bribe. The Attorney General should investigate James Fulton, her father. The sign included images of Steve and Kathy. Steve eventually left Viter for Houston in 1995 following the Billboard creation. That doesn't sound suspicious, now does it? After Kathy was buried, flowers at her grave were found scattered across the cemetery on more than one occasion. James Fulton hired a private investigator. Steve Page was caught on camera kicking the flowers and marking her grave. Sounds like a great guy. During the trial, the video showing Steve kicking the flowers at Kathy's grave was screened and other accounts came to light. According to Dorothy Fulton, Kathy's mother, she arrived at Kathy's home an hour after her daughter's body was found. Steve had a scratch on his nose and was pacing the living room, wiping his hands. Despite the early hour, he was doing laundry. A fresh wash was hanging up around the house. Dorothy and James visited the house 4 days after Kathy's death. While they were there, they witnessed Steve and some of his family members trying to clean the carpet in the living room. Dorothy said they were working on one spot of the carpet and was the moment James realized Steve killed his daughter. Because why would you be focusing on one little spot? Just sounds a little weird. It took 3 years for the district attorney to sign off on a search warrant for Kathy's home. Unfortunately, by this point, any evidence that could have been in the house would have been long gone by now, which meant the trial consisted of mostly witness accounts. And a trial like that tends to become a he said, she said scenario. Steve had told the police that all of Kathy's watches were missing, but later all were found except the one she was wearing when she died. He also denied talking to Kathy's friend Charlotte the night of Kathy's death, but he told others he had spoken to her. So he can't keep his story straight, has some very strange behaviors, and the police never thought to, I don't know, bring him in for further questioning? Kind of weird. Steve was financially liable for his wife's death and was ordered to pay $200,000 to the Fultons. Later, he was found guilty of repeatedly vandalizing her grave, but not for the murder of his wife. The police investigation was flawed from the very beginning. When the car was found, the usual steps weren't taken to ensure that all evidence was preserved, including photographs. Evidence was also lost by the police by not blocking off the crime scene. And there was no film in the cameras of the police cameras, which meant there were never any photographs taken of the scene of the crime. I mean, any evidence from Kathy's home that may have led police to the killer was gone by the time the warrant was issued 3 years later. Steve Page remarried and became a carpenter. He now has a young girlfriend, and his daughters live with his parents in Alabama and have been there since the death of their mother. I don't know about any of you, but I strongly think Steve did it. He sounds like a terrible person, especially for the treatment of his daughters. I mean, what kind of father dumps his kids at his parents' house so far away from where you're living and then just basically moves on with their life? It's insane that the cops didn't, in my opinion, they didn't do their damn job. So I don't blame Kathy's parents for being so pissed off at the police department. I would be furious too. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you think Steve did it and the police covered it up? It's disgusting if the police honestly did help cover up a murder, because you're basically saying he shouldn't pay for his actions. And she deserved it, which I don't think anybody deserves it. Plus, she left him. They were in the midst of getting a divorce. She has a right to move on, in my opinion. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you have any ideas on who else may have committed the crime, if Steve is honestly innocent in all of this. Thank you so much for watching and sticking around to the end. Later this week, I'll be sharing my review of the menu and maybe more info about Edward Harold Bell from the Texas Cornfields, since I'm kind of curious why he wasn't charged when he confessed. But if I don't look into him, I might look at another true crime case. So be on the lookout for that. And if you don't want to miss the upcoming content, be sure to click the bell icon to be the first notified about the new videos. Can't wait for more. Check out my other videos on the screen behind me or over me. I don't know how that works. If you found this interesting, click the like and subscribe button to join the family. They are such an amazing group. It's also free to join, unlike many things in our lives, but it's a huge help and I appreciate it so much. So thank you for all the support. Have a phenomenal week. Take care until next time. Bye, everyone.